Next on the docket, a spike in violent crime in big U.S. cities. Now, the nation has been dealing with the pandemic, as you know. We've got a financial crisis from the economy shutting down and massive protests after George Floyd was killed by police in Minneapolis. Some say it constitutes the perfect storm. Cities from coast to coast, including New York, Atlanta, Miami, Chicago, Minneapolis, and more are seeing big jumps in everything from homicides to gun violence. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo discussed possible causes during his press conference earlier today.
I think you had a number of contributing circumstances that, frankly, are conspiring. You had the Riker releases. You have district attorneys who sometimes appear not to be charging on the facts of the crime. And I think one of the situations we really have to address is the relationship between the community and the police, which is right now dysfunctional. It's just dysfunctional.
But New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and the NYPD, they are very far apart when agreeing on the why. The mayor, he's blaming COVID, and he says putting people out of work, hampering the court system. Cops say, no. Early releases from bail reform are major driving forces. Plus, police in many cities are saying they're feeling constricted out of what they can do on the streets due to the climate out there, and obviously the community or some members of it feel free rein to do what they want. All right, if we all agree, guys, that we've got a problem, let's first start with the cause. And I'll start with you, Doug. The governor laid out a whole bunch of reasons as to why. We looked at some of the numbers. We've talked in this program before about bail reform. There was a lot of people released even early from prison because of COVID concerns. We look at some of the recidivism rates. There's still, I think, 13% among some of the early releases. Where do you put the onus if we all can agree we got a real problem?
Well, I mean, it could be as simple as if people are not sitting in their apartments watching TV, they're out in the streets, for good reasons and for bad reasons. The more people that are out in the streets, the more crime will take place, whether it's intentional or just not intentional. I mean, if you look at crime, if people are all sitting at home, then not much crime happens. But the more people that come out, the more crime will take place. It's that simple.
You know, Jimmy, I saw something, it wasn't per se violent crime here where thankfully no one was hurt, but I saw a video today, this morning in the city where a couple guys were robbing an ATM machine, right? It was caught on cameras. They didn't even look away because they were all masked. And they didn't seem to be afraid that the cops are going to be rolling up at any time either. That dysfunctional relationship between police and communities of color primarily, but the police saying, we're going to treat things differently than we did maybe months ago. How much is that leading to a sense of not lawlessness, but lack of fear of police that maybe was present in a lot of these big cities, as recently as spring?
Look, I think that is a contributing factor, Rich. I think that that will precipitate a more brazen group of people out there who are thinking that the police won't be out there in the numbers that they used to. Quite frankly, I think that the fact that they're wearing masks as everybody else does, prevents identifications. I just think that everybody needs to be careful and make sure that we don't blame it on something that it is not. And everybody wants to jump and say it's the bail reform, but at least the early statistics that we have do not support that as a cause. There's absolutely no question that we have a problem. There were, 10 shootings alone, or 10 deaths and 10 homicides in the past weekend. There's clearly a very big problem, but I worry that there'll then be a knee-jerk reaction and undo bail reform, which was much needed, and probably is not the root cause of this increased violence.
Well, Mayo, to that point, you heard in Police Plaza saying, listen, a lot of guys, bad guys in Rikers were let out way earlier than they should have been. And through bail reform here, some people are doing bad things that shouldn't be out on the streets to begin with. What about that? There's a lot of contributing factors, but is that one of them?
That's a political statement, and that's a statement from people who were against bail reform before it was ever instituted. If you look and you realize that you have 8 million people in New York City, 12+ million people during the workday, and you're talking about 10 homicides, it's still a tremendously low number. And when you look at the number of people who die at the hands of drunk drivers, it probably rivals that. And we don't have the same outcry.
Mayo, you and I both know that we've seen the video, not just out in New York, but in Chicago, the tragic stories of kids getting killed by guns. Now, obviously, this is not new to Chicago, but the numbers and the percent increases year over year, it is real right now. Do you think that primarily in inner cities right now, if somebody makes a call to the cops to come, the response time is going to be a lot slower for a lot of different reasons than it was maybe even 5-6 months ago? Obviously, police have been painted with a broad brush by some as the enemy. Maybe I'm not justifying the slow response times, but nonetheless, do you get the sense that people think there's a void and some bad people can fill it?
I don't think that's why people are being killed. And by the way, when you call the police, it's not to stop a homicide, it's because one has already occurred. I've never heard of a homicide being stopped because the police get there right before the shot is fired. I hate to see this used as an opportunity by some to suggest that we should roll back bail reform. And even the statistics in terms of recidivism, 13% is, I would submit to you, less than it was previously. The other thing is that what are those 13%? Are we talking about people who got drunk out in the street and then they got drunk again? We're not talking about murders. We're not talking about an increase in violent crime. So we're mixing apples and oranges. So a person who repeatedly steals food for the family or steals cigarettes because they like to smoke is not somebody who is out there shooting people.
All right, guys, stay with me. When we come back, we all know the story. The woman who was caught on camera calling the cops on an African-American man in Central Park who was simply bird watching, she's now not only persona non grata, lost her job, but now she's facing charges, criminal charges. But she could get off, and for a reason that may surprise you. After the break, we'll explain.